For more on the day's top political stories, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Tyler Pager. Caitlin is a CBS News political reporter, and Tyler is White House reporter for The Washington Post. New CBS News polling sheds some light on what Americans think should be a high priority right now. And the top of the list is the economy with 76%. Inflation is second at 73%. Coming in third is crime, just ahead of the war in Ukraine. We see the numbers. Caitlin, how do these areas of concern line up with what Congress and the White House are making priorities?
Hey, Scott. Well, these numbers show the top issues for voters, Americans across the country. They also happen to be the issues on which Biden gets the lowest grades. So you're seeing that voters care about things like inflation, the economy, immigration, crime. Top priorities for them. But when they look at how the president is doing, they say that he is not doing well on those measures. And so as we're looking towards the midterm elections, that will be the time that voters are able to hold the president accountable, kind of making clear how they feel. These numbers are really not welcome news for the White House. And so you're seeing them really realizing they know that they have to focus on things like inflation and the economy. They know that voters are feeling this way. Tomorrow, Biden is set to go to Iowa, where he's expected to tout the infrastructure plan. He's expected to talk to rural Americans in Iowa. They have talked about kind of short-term ways to message on this. They've been calling the hikes in the economy the Putin price hike, specifically towards gas prices increasing. We'll see kind of how voters assess that. But these are issues, if you're looking at kind of going into a midterm election year, these are issues that will worry Democrats and kind of excite Republicans who want to campaign on a lot of these issues.
That being said, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, didn't sound too concerned about the economy in her briefing this afternoon. Take a listen.
We, of course, continue to assess the state of our economy, the health of our economy. That's not a projection we have made from here. We believe that the economy is strong. We have created more jobs last year than any year in American history. We saw the unemployment rate at 3.6% last month. And we know that as we're continuing through an economic recovery, that there are areas that we need to focus on, including bringing down costs for the American people.
And Caitlin, a number of economists argue the fundamentals are sound in the economy. It just doesn't seem to be resonating with the voters. So are Democrats planning to shift course?
That's right. Just because you say something doesn't mean people are actually feeling it. So this is going to be a situation where Democrats are going to be having to do a lot more showing and less telling. Yes, the economy looks very good on paper. Unemployment is down to 3.6%. But even when you look at the numbers in our poll, it's really interesting because Americans are saying that they feel pretty good about their own, about the local economy, but they're feeling negative about the national economy. So it's like this, on one hand, they're recognizing that the economy, looks good, but they're not necessarily feeling it. And what's driving that? Well, it's what we were just talking about. It's inflation, it's gas prices. Even though the administration can't really control something like gas prices, that's really kind of how voters tend to measure their own personal economy. Yes, someone can tell you that unemployment is down, that the economy looks good, but if you're going to the grocery store and things are costing more, if you're going out to dinner, things are costing more, if you're filling up your gas tank, which you need to get to work, and that's costing more, you're not going to have the same view of the economy as the press secretary was just laying out. Now, talking to Democrats on Capitol Hill, they recognize this, and they know that this is something that they're going to have to grapple with. And so that's why you're seeing this messaging, this Putin price hike. Again, we'll see if that resonates with voters. But you also saw Democrats bring in oil executives last week, to really grill them on these price hikes. And so you're seeing a lot of blame shifting going around here. But it is really key. And talking to Democratic strategists, I've been asking them, well, how are you going to message about this in the midterms? What does this kind of mean for you? And a lot have said, look, you're likely going to see Democrats campaigning around the country with a bridge in the background or next to a new, construction project, trying to tout the infrastructure plan and those sorts of things to kind of remind voters what they've done to address some economic issues. But the big challenge for Democrats is trying to figure out ways to cut costs for Americans who are grappling with things like the inflation and an economy that looks good on paper, but not necessarily looking good for them individually.
Tyler, crime was number 3 on the CBS News poll of what Americans list as a high priority. And today, President Biden addressed ghost guns. So what is driving the administration's focus on these ghost guns?
Yeah, this has been an issue that has been quite personal for Joe Biden and something that he has worked on for much of his career. When he was vice president, then President Obama tasked him with overseeing a task force to try to figure out how to reduce gun violence after the Sandy Hook massacre in Connecticut. And so this is an issue that he's been deeply involved in. And the latest front we saw today with him at the White House announcing the Justice Department was moving forward on creating this rule to try to eliminate the use of ghost guns. And ghost guns is the term that is used to describe guns that are untraceable. And it makes it really hard for police and investigators who are trying to investigate and solve crime to track guns that are made from these home kits that are untraceable. And so investigators have a difficult time locating exactly who might be the perpetrator or a suspect in a crime when a gun like this was used. And so Biden came out very strongly today, vowing that his administration would crack down on the proliferation of these guns that he says Americans are using to commit violence. And as you said, crime is obviously a big issue. It's a big issue in most elections, but as the CBS poll shows, is a particular salient now, and something that the president and his administration and Democrats throughout the country are really trying to message around and show that they're taking action to address.
Well, Tyler, let's talk more about firearms. President Biden says he's nominating Steve Dettelbach of Ohio to run the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives. What chance does the president have for his second nominee for the ATF to actually be confirmed? And why hasn't somebody been confirmed for this position since 2015?
Yeah, I think it's probably another long shot, but he's just announced the nominee, so the politics around the confirmation process are just starting to settle, and we'll see whether or not he's able to get the votes he needs. And as you said, this is an agency that has long been without leadership. The Biden administration has made it clear that that is a problem, and they want to address this. Obviously, this is the second nominee that he has put forth. The first one collapsed after Republicans unanimously opposed him or poised to unanimously oppose him. They didn't even need to get that far because he lost Democratic support. And the politics around gun safety and gun control are quite thorny. There are many Democratic senators who come from red states where gun policy and gun control look very different than they do in blue states. And so the politics of voting for someone to run this agency are complicated for a bunch of members of the Democratic caucus. I think there's optimism, once again, from the White House that they found the nominee that can thread the needle and be someone that can address gun control and gun safety while also getting the requisite number of votes. But again, these margins in the Senate are quite small. Democrats can't lose any member of their caucus if they want to get him through, assuming Republicans are going to unanimously oppose this nominee. But I think it's too early to say whether or not they found the right man this time around.
Caitlin, a recent ABC News poll shows 55% of Republicans are very enthusiastic about voting in the midterms, but 35% of Democrats are. What reaction do you hear about that baseline set of enthusiasm?
Well, the reason that this is significant is because midterm elections tend to be kind of base versus base. You want to figure out how to drive your base of support out in a midterm election year where, generally voters aren't as tuned in as they would for a general election. So this gives us an indication about kind of which party is more excited to vote. And if you're excited to vote, if you're enthusiastic about voting, you're likely to show up. And so that number, of course, is going to be, something that Democrats are going to, raise some alarm bells with Democrats if that indeed holds. I remember talking to Senator Jeff Merkley last year about filibuster reform, and he said, look, if Democrats aren't able to do away with the filibuster and get a lot of the things done, through the Senate, that could depress the Democratic base. And the reason why is because, there is concern about Democrats about what they have to show for voters and to get them to turn out and vote for them again. If they promised all of these things in the last election and weren't able to get them done in a divided Senate, even though they do control the Senate. It's by a razor-thin margin. Things like voting rights, things like Build Back Better, bigger programs that they wanted to get passed, they haven't been able to get passed. And so that could have an effect of depressing the base. And that's why Democrats that I've talked to have said that they need to be going out in the country more and talking about things that they have done, talking about things like the infrastructure bill and talking less about intra-party fights that kind of send the message of, well, nothing's really happening in Washington with that majority that you sent us here with. But those enthusiasm numbers are really important to keep an eye on as we approach the midterms. That gives us a sense about who's excited to vote and who will show up to vote. And, you know, it's turning out the vote, as we know, is what gets you to victory.
Tyler, lastly, Jen Psaki says the CDC is going to make a decision on whether to extend the transit COVID mask mandates, making people wear the masks on airplanes. Those mandates are set to expire April 18th. That's next week. So what do you hear is going to happen between now and next week?
Yeah, from my sources inside the administration, I've been told that the CDC is closely analyzing this policy and whether or not to extend it. And I think it's going to be difficult for a multitude of reasons. One, the CDC updated its framework a few weeks ago that led to a lot of cities and localities lifting mask restrictions as they changed the framework by which they determine whether or not it's a hotspot, you know, what colors the localities or cities look like on the map. And so much of the country looks green right now, meaning that the CDC does not necessarily recommend imposing mask requirements. But at the same time, there's evidence that cases are rising as variants spread, particularly here in Washington, D.C. We've seen a spate of high-profile officials coming down with cases of COVID. Luckily, most of those individuals are not going to the hospital or having some of those worst outcomes we saw earlier on in the pandemic, thanks to vaccines and other sort of treatments. But I think as officials see these cases rise, there's concern about lifting the mask mandate on airplanes, on other forms of public transit. So I think the CDC is trying to figure out exactly what the framework looks like to make this decision. But I know that will be a highly closely watched decision, especially from the airlines and other transit industries that have been pushing for some time for these mask mandates to be lifted.
Tyler Pager, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you both.